Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I don't have any personal announcements this week, so I'm just gonna jump right into the case because this is one that has baffled me for a really long time. It's baffled everybody, the police, the family members. A lot of you have probably already heard of it because it is a famous case, it is an old case. Today I wanted to talk about the Yuba County 5, which I've also seen referred to as the American Dyatlov Pass. So the Yuba County 5 were 5 young men that were all from Yuba City, California. They all had intellectual disabilities, but they were all considered high functioning. I'm just going to give a brief intro into each of them separately and then jump into what happened. So Ted Weir was 32 at the time. He is probably the most friendly one, I'd say. Every time somebody talks about him, they always say that he was super friendly. He would talk to anybody that he could get to listen. He just loved talking to people, loved meeting people. Then there was Jack Hewitt, who was 24. He was the youngest of the group. He was actually really close with Ted, probably closer than anybody else. They were kind of like brothers. Jack Hewitt was also referred to as Jackie as his nickname. There's 2 Jacks in this story, so I'm going to call him Jackie from now on. So then there was Gary Mathias, who was 25 at the time. Gary had actually served in the military, but he was released because he ended up having a problem with drugs and he had a lot of mental health concerns. The military ended up releasing him at age 20 and he was put on medication for schizophrenia. But they did say that his symptoms would only really act up in high stress situations. And then we have William Sterling, who was 28. He's known to be very nice, very generous, also very religious, and he spent a lot of time volunteering. Last we have Jack Madruga, who was 30. He was also a U.S. Army veteran and had actually served in Vietnam. Jack was actually able to drive and he had a car that he was obsessed with. It was a 1969 Mercury Montego. Hopefully I'm saying that right. I don't know anything about cars, but this car was his baby. He loved it. He would not let anyone else drive it. It was his. So these men were all involved with something called the Gateway Project, which was something made for people with disabilities. They all played Special Olympics basketball together. They actually had a game on February 24th, 1978, after which they ended up stopping at a gas station to grab some snacks. When they never showed up back home, their families started to worry. I mean, this was 1978, so people were not as easy to locate, so the families ended up contacting the police to report them missing. 4 days later, they found Jack Madruga's car in a remote area of Plumas National Forest. It was 70 miles away in the middle of nowhere. From everything I've seen, the road it was found on was very winding and dangerous, and it's believed that they would have had to have gone there on purpose. Most people don't think that this was just them taking a wrong turn and getting lost. Not to mention, it would have been dark at the time that they would have gone up there, like 10 or 11 p.m., and the roads were covered in snow and ice at that time. When the car was found, the police noticed that it was in perfect condition. There wasn't even any dents underneath the car, there was no damage to the car, and it still had a quarter tank of gas. The keys were gone. The police actually had to hotwire the car to figure out if there was still gas in the tank, but they did notice a map of California and their snack wrappers from when they stopped at the gas station. The ground was covered in about 10 inches of snow, and they noticed the car was stuck in a position where if they tried to get it out, the wheel would just keep spinning. And of course, none of the men were in the car when they found it. Something to note is that Jack, the owner of the car, his parents said that he hated camping and he hated the cold and he'd never been up in the mountains before. So it just makes it all the more odd that they were up there. According to families, none of these guys had ever been up in this area before. And they had just been dressed for the basketball game, so they were not wearing the warmest of clothes. They were definitely not dressed for the blizzard that was happening. Police sent out a bunch of search teams, even rescue dogs, but they didn't find anything, and they actually ended up having to call off the search because it was so cold. Later, a 55-year-old man named Joseph Shones ended up giving a tip to the police. He said that he was in that area the night the guys went missing. Joseph had a cabin up in this area. He said that he was up there because he wanted to bring his wife and his daughter up to that area, but he wanted to make sure the conditions were safe to drive on. His car also ended up getting stuck while he was up there, and when he was trying to get it out, he suffered a heart attack. He decided that he couldn't work on the car anymore while he was in that much pain, so he ended up just getting back in and turning on the heat and laying down. Later that night, he claimed to hear whistling coming from the side of the road where he looked to see 5 guys, and with them he said there was a lady with a baby. He also said that he saw 2 vehicles and one of them was a pickup truck. He tried calling out for help, but I guess they just ignored him, so eventually he just got back in the car and their car lights eventually went out. I was extremely sus of this man at the beginning just because he was the only one up in that area, and I feel like the story is a little weird, but he was checked out by doctors later and they confirmed that he did actually have a heart attack. His story changed a little bit here and there. He said that he was having a hard time remembering the details, but most of the story stayed the same except for the lady with the baby. They were never able to confirm if she was actually there or who it was. Joseph's car ended up running out of gas because it was on all night, so he decided that he was just going to walk back to the cabin that he had, which was about 8 miles away from his car. He passed Jack Madruga's car on the way and he said it was empty. Months passed with no word and no sign of the boys. Nobody had seen them anywhere, but 3 months later, on June 4th, the first body was found. It was getting into the warmer months, so all of the snow was melting and everything was thawing out. Some motorcyclists were riding up in that area when they passed a deserted Regional Park Services trailer camp. They said that it smelled absolutely horrible. They knew that it was rotting flesh and they immediately called police. When the responders got there and they searched the trailer, they found Ted Weir's body, which had been frozen and was thawing out. They found 8 sheets wrapped around his body, which they said looked deliberate, like maybe somebody had done some weird ritual or wrapped him up, but it wouldn't have been something that he did himself. My thought was that maybe some of the other guys were with him and he eventually passed, so they just wrapped him up so that they didn't have to look at him, or maybe they just didn't know what else to do. The leather boots that Ted was wearing were missing, but on the bedside table next to him were some of his belongings. There was a ring that he wore all the time. It actually had his name engraved into it. His wallet and his gold necklace were also found. Another thing they found was a gold Waltham watch, which did not belong to Ted, and none of the other families recognized it either. Ted's body was completely emaciated. Before he went missing, he was around 200 pounds, and when they found him, he was closer to 100. He had grown a beard and his feet had really bad frostbite. After looking at his body, more specifically his beard with the amount of growth that it had, they determined that he had been starving for 8 to 13 weeks. His death was listed as a combination of starvation and hypothermia. This trailer was about 20 miles away from Jack's car. It was also locked, but it had a broken window. There were lots of materials to make a fire with, but no sign that one was ever made. There were more than a dozen cans of pre-cooked food from the military. I think it was like rations or something like that had been opened and consumed. They assumed that Ted was the one who ate them. But the weird thing is that some of these cans showed evidence of being opened by a specific military can opener. It was a P-38 can opener, and only 2 of the 5 guys had served in the military and would have known how to use it, which was Gary and Jack. They later found that Gary's shoes were in the trailer, so it's assumed that he was in there for at least some time and would have been the one to open those cans. They found heavy forestry clothing that would have kept the men warm but wasn't used. There was a shed near the trailer that contained a bunch of food that had not been opened. They said there was enough food to keep all 5 men alive for up to a year. They also found a propane tank completely untouched that could have kept them warm. I do want to read something that I found in an article that came directly from his family members. I'm just going to read it as is. Quote, "This behavior, however, was consistent with what Weir's family members described as a lack of common sense arising from his mental disability. He often questioned why he should stop at a stop sign, and one night he needed to be dragged out of bed while his bedroom ceiling was burning in a house fire, since he was worried about missing his job the next day if he left his bed. So while these guys are considered high functioning, their disabilities may have played a part in their passing, at least possibly in Ted's case. On June 5th, they found the remains of Jack and William. They were a ways down the road from where Ted was found, but they were still 11 miles away from the car. They were also found on different sides of the road. Jack's body was found near a stream, and it seemed that animals had gotten to him first because his body was in a horrible condition. It was just completely shredded. William's body had actually completely decomposed. His bones had been scattered within a 50-foot area, and both of their deaths were listed as hypothermia. 2 days later, Jackie's body was found. It was actually found by his own dad during a search. He found his spine under a bush. His shoes and jeans were nearby, which helped them to identify that it was his. And the next day, the sheriff found his skull down the hill from where the bush was and was able to confirm that it was him, and his death was also listed as hypothermia. In an area that was about a quarter mile from the trailer, they found 3 Forest Service blankets and a rusted flashlight off the side of the road. They could not determine how long those items had been there. Gary was the only one they never found, but his shoes were found in the trailer where Ted was found, so they figured that maybe he switched shoes, as Ted's shoes were a little bit more suited for the weather. And since he presumably had not taken his medication and does struggle with schizophrenia, they ended up passing his photo out to a bunch of mental institutions throughout California, but no trace of him was ever found. So I'm gonna hop into theories real quick because there are a few. The first being that maybe they witnessed something after the basketball game that they weren't supposed to see, but then why did they stop at the gas station for snacks? Maybe they saw something at the gas station instead. They may have been chased up the mountain until they got lost, and then maybe they just tried to survive until help came. But if you were running away from somebody, your car being in perfect condition just doesn't make sense. A theory from police is that apparently the day before the guys went missing, a snowcat had gone up to the area to clear the snow off the trailer roof so that it wouldn't collapse. Maybe some of the guys tried to follow the tracks, hoping that there was people or shelter nearby, which could explain why some of them are found outside. Of course, there's more bizarre theories with this one. Some people have said maybe aliens. Some people might think something supernatural. They were kind of up in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. In foresty areas, kind of like the area they were in, is where wendigos exist. I mean, one of their bodies had clearly been attacked or eaten, which could be a mountain lion or just whatever kind of wildlife lives up there is probably the most reasonable explanation, but I guess you never know. Something that really bothers me about this case is the fact that Gary was never found. I'm curious as to if this high stress situation might have sparked his schizophrenia, and I'm curious where he would have gone off to. I mean, at this point, it's been so long since this case. We will probably never know. There's just not a lot of evidence in this case, and as far as we know, they haven't found anybody with a motive, so it just doesn't make sense, and it's so frustrating, especially considering all the time that has passed. I don't know that this case will ever be solved, and I don't know that they ever had any leads about it. I mean, all of their deaths were listed as more natural causes like hypothermia, so it doesn't lead toward foul play, but the fact that they were ever up there to begin with confuses everybody, and especially their families. Like, they would have had no reason. They weren't familiar with the area, they weren't dressed for it. The car that they took up there, I'm surprised it even made it as far as it did. It's not a very big car. I'd assume that its tires are also not built for snow, and they were never able to figure out if there was a lady with a baby up there or why. Anyway, that is it. This is a short case just because there's not a lot of information. I would like to remind you guys really quick that I do have those forms available in the description. I have 3 separate forms. One is just for topic suggestions, one is for crime cases, and I have another one for family members of victims if you would like me to cover that case. All of those forms are down below. I'll link them in every description, so if anything ever pops up, you guys know where to submit it. And other than that, I will see you next time. Bye, guys.